It all began with a number. Just a single cold digit that seemed out of place. It appeared on a routine mortality report at the County General Hospital. Most staff members would have missed it, overworked, tired, accustomed to the daily rhythms of life and death. A small spike in patient deaths was not unheard of. A bad flu season, a sudden heat wave, simply statistical chance. But one junior administrator, a young woman with a keen eye for detail, saw something more. The number felt wrong. It was a silent alarm bell ringing in an empty room. A quiet disruption in the hospital's predictable pulse. This initial flicker of unease would soon ignite a firestorm. The administrator, let's call her Sarah, decided to look closer. She pulled up the records for the past quarter. The data was a sea of medical jargon and sterile facts. Patient names, admission dates, causes of death, heart failure, pneumonia, sepsis. Everything looked normal on the surface, yet the small cluster of deaths bothered her. They were all on the same ward. They all occurred during the night shift. These were patients supposed to be stable, on the road to recovery. Their sudden declines were unexpected, baffling the attending physicians. The hospital was a place of healing, but something sinister was beginning to curdle beneath its pristine facade. The first case file Sarah examined was that of an elderly man named Arthur. He was 78, admitted for a routine hip replacement. He was a grandfather, a retired carpenter who loved telling stories. The operation was a success. He was cheerful, eager to go home. His chart showed a steady recovery. Then, one night, his heart simply stopped. The official report was brief and clinical. Cardiac arrest. It was ruled a natural, if tragic, event. But as Sarah read the nurse's notes, a single entry stood out. A medication was administered just an hour before his death. A medication that was not on his prescribed list. It was a detail so small it was almost invisible, a tiny crack in a seemingly solid wall. The discovery was unsettling. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the office air conditioning. Was she seeing ghosts in the data? Was she manufacturing a conspiracy out of a coincidence? She tried to dismiss it, to file the report and move on with her day. But the image of Arthur stuck in her mind, and with it the nagging question of that unprescribed drug. The hospital's motto, etched in brass by the main entrance, was "Healing with Compassion." But as Sarah stared at the cold, hard data, she wondered if something far less compassionate was at work within these walls. Something was terribly wrong. Driven by a growing sense of dread, Sarah widened her search. She pushed aside her regular duties, working late into the night. The hospital became a different place after dark. The corridors were quiet, the fluorescent lights humming with an eerie buzz. She pulled more files, dozens of them. Each one told a similar heartbreaking story. A patient recovering well, a sudden catastrophic turn, a death certificate signed with a familiar sterile explanation. The causes of death were varied, but the circumstances were disturbingly consistent. Each patient was on Ward C. Each death occurred between midnight and 4 a.m. The pattern was no longer a flicker. It was a steady, pulsing signal. One by one, the faces of the deceased emerged from the paperwork. There was Eleanor, a 52-year-old teacher recovering from pneumonia. Then there was David, a young construction worker who had broken his leg. The official reports were clean, logical, and devoid of suspicion. Natural causes, complications from existing conditions, the hospital's internal reviews found nothing amiss. Yet the data told a different story. The deaths were not random. They were connected by an invisible thread, a thread that was becoming thicker and more tangible with every file Sarah opened. The system was designed to trust its professionals. Doctors and nurses are dedicated to saving lives, not ending them. The idea that a killer could be walking the halls was unthinkable, a plot from a cheap thriller novel, not a reality in a modern medical facility. This inherent trust created a blind spot. Small anomalies were easily explained away. A missing vial of medication was a clerical error. An unusual patient reaction was a rare side effect. No one wanted to believe the alternative. No one dared to connect the dots. The institution itself was inadvertently providing cover for the darkness that had taken root within it. They could not see the monster in their midst. Sarah compiled her findings into a confidential report. Her hands trembled as she printed the pages. The charts, the timelines, the names. It was a chronicle of death that had gone unnoticed. The numbers painted a terrifying picture. The mortality rate on Ward C during the night shift was 5 times higher than any other ward in the hospital. It wasn't a statistical fluke. It was a massacre in slow motion. She knew that handing this report over would change everything. It would shatter the hospital's reputation and plunge it into chaos. But the alternative, staying silent, was impossible. The pattern was clear. A killer was on the ward, and their shift was about to start. County General Hospital was a city within a city. During the day, its corridors buzzed with controlled chaos. Doctors rushed from room to room, their white coats a blur of motion. Nurses juggled patient charts, IV drips, and the constant chime of call bells. The air smelled of antiseptic, floor polish, and the faint metallic scent of illness. It was a place of high stakes and constant pressure. Yet there was a rhythm to it, a steady, predictable heartbeat. The morning shift brought the flurry of doctors' rounds and new admissions. The afternoon shift handled discharges and preparations for the night. Everyone had a role. Everyone knew the routine. The system was designed for efficiency, for saving lives. At night, the hospital's personality changed completely. The daytime bustle faded into a deep, humming quiet. The main lights were dimmed, leaving long, distorted shadows stretching down the empty hallways. This was the time of the night shift. A smaller, tight-knit crew took over. They were the guardians of the hospital's most vulnerable hours. On Ward C, the general medical ward, the routine was simple. Check vitals, administer scheduled medications, respond to any emergencies. For the most part, the nights were peaceful. Patients slept, their breathing a soft metronome in the darkened rooms. The nurses' station was an island of light in the quiet expanse, a place for hushed conversations and endless paperwork. The staff on Ward C were like a family, bound by shared stress and long hours. There was head nurse Brenda, a veteran of 20 years who had seen it all. There was Mark, a young, energetic nurse who often took the night shift to pay for his graduate studies. And there was Charles, the quiet and diligent orderly who seemed to be everywhere at once. They trusted each other implicitly. In the high-pressure world of healthcare, that trust was essential. It was the glue that held the team together. When a patient's condition suddenly worsened, they worked as one, a seamless unit fighting against time. This trust was the bedrock of Ward C, but this very trust also created a vulnerability. The hospital's systems relied on the integrity of its staff. Medication logs were filled out by hand. Access to the pharmacy stores was based on an honor system for senior nurses. Everyone assumed their colleagues were acting with the patient's best interests at heart. Who would question a fellow nurse grabbing an extra vial of potassium? It was probably for an emergency. Who would double-check a medication entry logged during a chaotic code blue? The system was not built to suspect betrayal. It was built on the assumption of care, an assumption that was about to be tragically and horrifically shattered. The first death that truly raised eyebrows was Mrs. Gable. She was 67, admitted with a mild respiratory infection. She was a vibrant woman who loved gardening and was expected to be home in a few days. Her recovery was textbook. Her vitals were strong. She told her daughter she was feeling better than she had in weeks. A few hours later, at 2:15 a.m., she was dead. The cause was listed as a massive, unexpected heart attack. The night staff were shaken. It was sudden, a bolt from the blue. But in a hospital, the unexpected can happen. It was a tragedy, but it was filed away as just that. A week later, it happened again. This time, it was a man named Frank, a 45-year-old recovering from minor surgery. Like Mrs. Gable, he was on Ward C. Like Mrs. Gable, he was stable and on the mend. His wife had been with him until 9 p.m. He was laughing, making plans for a fishing trip. At 3:30 a.m., a code blue was called for his room. The crash team worked frantically, but they couldn't bring him back. Again, the cause was cardiac arrest. Dr. Evans, the attending physician, was baffled. Frank had no history of heart problems. The suddenness of it was alarming. He reviewed the chart, searching for a clue, an explanation. There was none. It was after Frank's death that the whispers began. 2 sudden, inexplicable deaths in 1 week, on the same ward, during the same shift. The night nurses spoke about it in hushed tones at the station. They called it a black cloud over the ward. It was unsettling. They were used to death, but not like this. These weren't patients who were fading away. These were patients who were being extinguished like candles. A quiet anxiety started to creep into the night shift routine. Nurses began double-checking their own work a little more carefully than before. A subtle tension replaced the usual camaraderie. No one said it out loud, but everyone was thinking it. This was not normal. Head nurse Brenda noticed the change in her staff's morale. She also noticed the small anomalies that started to pile up. A box of insulin syringes went missing from the supply closet. A patient's chart had a medication entry that was scribbled out and rewritten. Brenda tried to reassure her team, telling them they were just having a bad run of luck. But privately, she felt a growing unease. She started keeping her own private log of the night shift activities, noting down anything that seemed even slightly out of place. She didn't know what she was looking for, but a gut feeling told her she needed to watch. The nights on Ward C were no longer safe. The investigation sparked by Sarah's report began quietly. Senior Administrator, the Chief of Medicine, formed a secret committee. They couldn't risk a public panic. They had to move carefully, like detectives searching a fragile crime scene. Scrutinize the hospital's records, pharmacy logs for Ward C. Looking for a needle in a haystack, thousands of routine entries. They focused on the nights of the unexplained deaths. Cross-referenced pharmacy logs, patient charts, nurses' shift schedules. A faint pattern began to emerge, night of Mrs. Gable's death. A vial of digoxin was signed out. Mrs. Gable was not prescribed digoxin. Entry logged under another patient's name. That patient discharged 2 days earlier, night of Frank's death. 2 vials of succinylcholine missing. No record they were used. Not clerical errors. Evidence of deception. Investigators felt a cold certainty. Someone was falsifying records to acquire specific drugs. Digoxin can induce cardiac arrest in high doses. Succinylcholine would paralyze respiratory muscles, causing suffocation almost impossible to detect in an autopsy. The killer used the hospital pharmacy as a weapons cabinet, exploiting chaos and the trust of the system to hide actions. A ghost in the machine, moving unseen. The killer knew the system inside and out. The committee realized they were dealing with a medical professional. Only a doctor or nurse would know how to do this. Narrowed staff on duty during every suspicious death. The list was terrifyingly short. Nurse 1, Nurse 2, Nurse 3, Nurse 4, Nurse 5, orderly, trusted employees, colleagues, friends. The idea one of them was a murderer seemed impossible, yet the evidence pointed at them. Pool of suspects. The ghost had a face, 6 possible faces. The killer was one of their own. To build a stronger case, the investigators decided to speak with the families of the victims. They had to be careful, framing their questions as part of a routine quality review. Their first interview was with Michael, Frank's son. Michael was a quiet man in his early 20s, his face still etched with grief and confusion.
"He was fine," Michael said, his voice barely a whisper. "He was joking with the nurse. He told me to bring his fishing gear to the hospital so he could go straight to the lake when they discharged him."
Michael recounted the evening in detail. He remembered the nurse who was tending to his father. He described him as friendly, efficient, very professional. "He was great," Michael said. "He was always checking in, making sure my dad was comfortable. He even brought him an extra blanket." The nurse had administered his father's final dose of evening medication right before Michael left. He had watched the nurse do it. It all seemed so normal, so routine. The memory was now tainted with a horrifying new significance. That moment of care might have been a moment of murder, happening right before his eyes.
The investigators asked Michael if he remembered the nurse's name. Michael shook his head. "I don't know," he said, his brow furrowed in concentration.
He was just the night nurse. Quiet guy, very calm. He described a man of average height and build, someone you wouldn't look at twice. An unremarkable presence. This was a common theme they would hear from other families. The killer was a shadow, blending into the background of the busy ward. They were a friendly face, a helping hand, a comforting presence in the middle of the night. This was how they got close. This was how they avoided suspicion. They used their uniform as a cloak of invisibility.
As the interview concluded, Michael looked up at the administrators, his eyes pleading for an answer. "Why did he die?" he asked. "The doctors said his heart just gave out. But he was strong. He never had a heart problem in his life. It doesn't make any sense."
The investigators could offer him no comfort, no easy answers. They could only thank him for his time. As Michael left the room, his quiet grief hung in the air. His simple, painful question, "Why?" echoed in their minds. It was no longer just about data and charts. It was about Frank, Mrs. Gable, and all the others. And it was about finding the person who had turned a place of healing into a hunting ground. The secret committee's investigation was now a race against time. They knew a killer was walking the wards of County General. Every night shift brought a new wave of fear. They needed hard, irrefutable proof. They turned back to the data. They brought in a data analyst. He was simply asked to find any and all statistical anomalies on Ward C. The results came back a week later. They were chilling. The analyst presented his findings on a large screen in the hospital's boardroom. First expected mortality, a gentle, predictable curve. Then actual Ward C mortality overlaid. For the first 3 years, the lines matched. About 2 years ago, the Ward C line spiked dramatically. The divergence was a steep, jagged mountain climb. The numbers were screaming. He then broke the data down by shift. Day shift, normal. Evening shift, normal. Night shift, a bloodbath. A massive dark red column dwarfed the others.
The probability of this occurring by chance is less than 1 in 10 million. This is not random. This is statistically significant.
An external factor is dramatically increasing mortality on the night shift. The committee sat in stunned silence. Seeing it in mathematics removed all doubt. It confirmed a human predator. Final slide, scatterplot. Each dot a death. An ominous cluster between midnight and 4 a.m. The killer had a schedule. While the administrators were staring at their damning charts, a different kind of evidence was about to surface. The whispers among the nursing staff on Ward C had grown from anxious murmurs to outright fear. One nurse, let's call her Amy, had worked several shifts with the main suspect, a quiet but highly efficient nurse named Charles. Amy had always found him a little odd. He was a loner, but he was also one of the best nurses on the ward. Amy started noticing things, small, almost trivial details. Charles always volunteered to do the final rounds alone. He always offered to handle the medication for the most difficult patients. She once saw him coming out of the supply closet late at night. When she asked what he was doing, he simply smiled and said he was double-checking inventory. It was a perfectly reasonable explanation. But Amy saw a flicker in his eyes, a brief flash of something cold and guarded. She started keeping a small notebook. She wrote down the times Charles went on his rounds. She wrote down which rooms he entered. The breaking point for Amy came one Tuesday night. An elderly patient, Mr. Henderson, was recovering well. Amy saw Charles go into his room around 1 a.m. Less than an hour later, Mr. Henderson's heart monitor blared the piercing alarm of a flatline. The next day, Amy saw the official report. Cardiac arrest. Natural causes. But Amy knew Mr. Henderson had no cardiac history. The coincidence was too great. The pattern was undeniable. She looked at her notebook. Every single unexplained death had happened after Charles had been with the patient. Terrified, Amy knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. Going to her direct supervisors felt risky. What if they didn't believe her? What if they protected Charles, their star nurse? She felt trapped. The fear was paralyzing. But the thought of another patient dying was worse. With trembling hands, she found the number for the hospital's anonymous compliance hotline. She took a deep breath and made the call. In a hushed, shaking voice, she told the operator everything she had seen. She reported her suspicions about her colleague, Charles. The whistleblower had sounded the alarm. The ghost on the ward finally had a name. The whistleblower's call galvanized the investigation. The committee now had a prime suspect, Charles Cullen, a name that would soon become infamous. They immediately launched a deep background check. What they found was horrifying. Charles had a long and troubled history, fired or forced to resign from half a dozen hospitals, nursing homes as well. Each time he left under a cloud of suspicion. Rumors of medication errors, allegations of misconduct, missing drug vials. Nothing was ever proven, no formal charges were filed. He moved on to the next facility, record seemingly clean. Investigators contacted former employers. A grim picture emerged. At one hospital, several patients died from insulin overdoses. At another, a rash of unexplained cardiac arrests. Each time, Charles had been on duty. Each time, hospitals ran quiet internal reviews. They failed to connect the dots or quietly remove the employee without alerting authorities. They passed the buck, fearing lawsuits and bad publicity. This culture of silence let a serial killer move hospital to hospital, leaving a trail of bodies. They brought in forensic toxicologist Dr. Alvarez. He was an expert in poisons that mimic natural medical events. A killer with medical knowledge is the most dangerous kind. They know the system's weaknesses. They know what drugs to use. Digoxin, lethal in high doses, mimics a heart attack. Insulin, blood sugar collapse, coma, mistaken for diabetic complication. Succinylcholine, paralysis and suffocation, leaves almost no trace. A standard autopsy won't find these unless told to look. The deaths were ruled natural. He used expert knowledge as his primary weapon. He created the perfect crime over and over. In busy, understaffed hospitals, he hid in plain sight, using a nurse's uniform as the ultimate disguise. He was a wolf in scrubs. Armed with the statistical data, the whistleblower's testimony, and Charles Cullen's disturbing employment history, the investigators began a covert surveillance operation. They couldn't arrest him yet. They needed to catch him in the act or find physical proof. Hidden cameras were installed in Ward C's medication supply room. The pharmacy's automated dispensing system was tracked, every transaction logged by user ID. Charles's ID lit up like a Christmas tree. The logs showed him accessing drugs not prescribed to his patients. Digoxin, insulin, bags of saline. Investigators watched logs in real time. They felt like they were watching a horror movie. The killer gathering his tools. The pattern: withdraw drug, do rounds. Hours later, a code blue. But no proof he administered the drugs. They set a risky trap. They worked with Amy, the whistleblower nurse. She was instructed to watch Charles closely. One night, she saw him enter a patient room not on his list. The patient, 72-year-old Mr. Evans. Amy alerted investigators. They checked the dispensing timestamps. Moments before entering, Charles withdrew a vial of digoxin. This was it, the moment they'd waited for. They waited until his shift ended, and he left. Team entered Mr. Evans's room, blood drawn and sent for emergency toxicology. IV bag collected, agonizing weight. Lab called, lethal digoxin in blood. IV contaminated. They had him. The ghost was finally caught. The trap was set. The evidence was in place. The investigators decided to make the arrest after his shift ended. For Charles Cullen, it would be his final shift as a nurse. He arrived for work on the evening of December 12th, 2003, completely unaware that he was being watched. He was a ghost about to become visible. That night, Cullen followed his usual routine. He was calm, efficient, professional. To his colleagues, it was just another night on Ward C. They had no idea that their quiet, dependable co-worker was the subject of a major police investigation. At 7 a.m., the night shift ended. Charles Cullen clocked out and walked out into the cold December morning. As he reached for his car door, two figures emerged. They approached him calmly.
Charles Cullen, one of them asked. Cullen looked up, his face showing a brief flash of confusion, but no fear. He nodded. The detective identified himself and told him he was under arrest. The hunt was over.
Charles Cullen was taken to a small, sterile interrogation room. He was not handcuffed. The detectives Pat and Tim wanted to create a non-confrontational atmosphere. They offered him coffee. He denied everything. He insisted the deaths were just tragic coincidences. For hours, he maintained his innocence. He showed no emotion, no empathy, no remorse. They decided to change tactics. They started laying out the evidence piece by piece. They showed him the pharmacy logs, the statistical charts, the internal memos. They built a mountain of paper, a monument to his crimes.
The turning point came when Detective Pat brought up the contaminated IV bag. He simply said, "We know what you did, Charles. We just need to know why."
For the first time, a crack appeared in Cullen's calm facade. His eyes flickered. His composure began to crumble. The weight of the evidence finally broke him. Charles Cullen slumped in his chair. He took a deep breath and began to talk. He started with one name, then another, and another. He confessed. The monster finally spoke. The confession of Charles Cullen sent shockwaves across the country. The quiet, unassuming nurse was not just a killer, but one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. As he began cooperating with investigators, the true scale of his reign became sickeningly clear. He spoke of his crimes with chilling detachment. He estimated around 40. Investigators suspect hundreds. In a deal to avoid the death penalty, Cullen pled guilty and agreed to help identify victims. He was sentenced to 11 consecutive life terms, ensuring he'd never be free. For families, the trial brought a painful, incomplete justice. They finally had a face for their grief and anger. They had been failed by the system. The sense of betrayal was profound. The hospitals faced a public relations nightmare. Lawsuits mounted into the hundreds of millions. The hospital overhauled procedures completely. The case was a brutal, costly lesson in accountability. The Charles Cullen case was a terrifying wake-up call. In response, sweeping reforms were enacted. New Jersey passed the Patient Safety Act. It provided legal protection for whistleblowers like Amy. The case spurred technological innovation in patient safety, electronic health records, barcode medication administration systems. These technologies created a digital paper trail. The system became less reliant on blind trust. It highlights the courage of whistleblowers, the first flicker of doubt in Sarah's mind, the quiet observations of Nurse Amy. The ghosts of Ward C will never be forgotten. Their legacy is sorrow. Their legacy is change. Systems to protect us are only as strong as the people within them. True safety requires more than just trust. It requires constant, unwavering vigilance. We must never stop watching.